Welcome to the Spoilercast for Rehydrate. This episode will contain spoilers for all of the Three-Body Problem, The Dark Forest, and Death's End. If you don't want to be spoiled on future events, please skip this episode. This is Season 3, Episode 2, Cosmic Brush, where we will be discussing the second half of Part 1 of The Dark Forest by Lucy Shin. My name is Amin, and I have only read up to our current point, and also I do not mind spoilers at all, so I'm here to have the rest of the series spoiled for me.
Hi, I'm Dan. I've read the series a bunch of times.
Hi, I'm Thalia. I've listened to the series once through. I'm rereading in concordance with the Spoilercast.
So I did have one issue of follow-up that we meant to discuss last time, but I kind of forgot to bring it up. But because it's a Spoilercast, and Amin mentioned that he doesn't care about spoilers, but I kind of want to just get a sense of what all of our tolerance for spoilers are in media that we do care about. So I'll go first and say that I'm paranoid and avoid spoilers as much as I possibly can. And the more I care about something, the more I'll avoid spoilers. Like, for example, for like the Star Wars movies, like I wouldn't even watch any of the trailers, even though I was ultimately disappointed with them, but that's a different podcast, I guess. But yeah, like I will really actively avoid spoilers. So I would not have participated in this series if the shoe was on the other foot there. How about you, Talia?
Oh boy, I would say that as I grew more invested in the Remembrance of Earth's Past, I cared more and more about spoilers. I think throughout the first book, I wouldn't have minded knowing more. And then as I was drawn into like the more intricate plots in the second book, I was thinking, wow, okay, so we've taken some pretty big risks. I'd like to see if those pay off. Similar buy-in to like a Star Wars universe. You're trusting someone to build a world. And so you're hoping that those pay off. And I think that one of the reasons I liked listening to the books, like I mentioned, was that in an audiobook version, you can't feel in your hands how much is left, how much is to go. So especially in the third book, I was continually amazed and surprised at like the new directions a book could go, as opposed to, seeing those last few pages disappearing. So I was most spoiler averse for the third book.
That is true. Like, yeah, like I know, like when you're, especially like when you're watching TV or something, it's like there's like 2 minutes left. I'm like, all right, well, they're probably gonna wrap this up, or they're gonna, be to be continued or something.
How about you, Amin?
So I clearly don't mind spoilers. I'm trying to think if there are even things that I really like that I'm invested in. I don't think I really care about spoilers that much. I don't think it ruins the experience for me. One of the questions, so Dan and I were talking about this on Slack a while ago, and one of the questions I asked him, and I'll let him re-answer it, but Thalia, I'm interested in your answer. If you are, so you're rereading this series, so you already know what's going to happen. So how is your experience different now that you know what's going to happen as opposed to the first time when you were being exposed to all this?
Yeah, Dan, can you take that just to summarize your position?
Me personally, the first time and this is kind of true for all media, TV shows, books, whatever, movies, all that kind of stuff. Usually, like, I like the experience of not being spoiled for it, for like kind of the surprise and just like the overall story aspect of it, right? But I'm not overanalyzing things. Maybe I'm not smart enough to, analyze and take in the media at the same time. Like some people are really good at that, like they'll have like initial reaction videos and be like, whoa, like how did they catch all that stuff? And like, I'm just like, amazed by the spectacle of things, And if I get really into a series, then I'll go and study it more or maybe reread it. So like this series or Game of Thrones or the Song of Ice and Fire series or some movies that I'm into, like I'll go and analyze them and rewatch them. Generally, for the first pass, I'm just kind of looking for the big payoffs.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. I would say that the first time I experienced these books, there was more depth and intensity to the emotion and to following the story, and there were bigger payoffs for the risks that the author took. Secondly, I would say that rereading the books does let you appreciate moments of foreshadowing that you might have missed and appreciate some of the literary devices. I was looking at the notes from the main episode and Tim hoping that we wouldn't need to wait until the end of the third book to get to the Doomsday Battle. And I remember really mirroring that in my first read. I remember if you have a physical copy in front of you, you can see part 1 opens, and the way that they're judging time is distance of the Trisolarian fleet from Earth, and it opens 4.21 light years. And then you read, you invest like another 200 pages, you get to part 2, And right then, part 2 is like distance of the Trisolarian fleet 4.20, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we've only gone like 0.01. But in this reread, I'm seeing that our experience reading is mirroring what all of human civilization is going through. Like they're waiting, they're anxious, and they're expecting to move forward faster than they actually are.
Oh, that's interesting. And then yeah, in part 3, it jumps like 200 years. It's like whoa.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think like even if like I'd skipped that much ahead and like looked at that, I would have been spoiled on it, right? Because like I wouldn't have guessed. I mean, like as soon as I read it, like I saw it, but like if I had looked at those chapter markings ahead of time, then I would have kind of been spoiled on it, and it would not ruin it, but like be it would be less of a surprise. And that's actually one of the reasons I didn't put when I was putting the reading list together for this podcast, like I always specifically was like really trying to avoid spoilers and like trying to make sure that I didn't put like, because like that's the only chapter markings that they have is like distance to the Trisolaris fleet or whatever, the distance to Earth or whatever. So yeah.
But yeah, good question. Risk tolerance definitely varies, and I think we have different reasons for each of our answers.
And another one, the thing I did notice in Death's End, in the very if you have the copy in front of you, I don't know if you do, but like in the very beginning, it has the table of eras, right? And so like it has, and that's like the first
Don't
thing you
even
see.
get me started on that.
I know, and like I remember I'm looking at it right now, and like the first time I looked at it, and like the last one is like, or the second last one, yeah, like Black Domain era for the DX3906 system, 2687 to 18 million something. I was like, I saw that, I was like, what?
If there's such a thing as like risk tolerance for other people, I'd say like that's where it's peaked. If I'm giving it to someone else, I'm like, don't look at the eras. I promise, just let the story unfold, because you're not trying to have that expectation.
Yeah, so I mean, if you don't want to be spoiled on Death's End, don't read the table of contents, but too late.
I do want to be spoiled on Death's End, so.
Okay, well, let's move on to the content of this episode. So in the main episode, I do like a more detailed summary, but I wanted to kind of give like a general overview for people who might not listen to the main show. So in the last show, we kind of went over Zhang Beihai. He chooses the high-tech path forward and talks about building ships that can achieve 5% of light speed and have a full life support. We also have Ray Diaz researching how to build a bigger bomb. And we have Tyler talking to Al-Qaeda and a kamikaze expert. And we have Luo Ji living a life of luxury and embracing his role as the wall facer. We have Dasher finding Zhang Yan. And finally, we have the Hubble telescope seeing the Trisolarian fleet through the cosmic debris of around Trisolaris. So one thing I noticed in this read, I guess like I'm more analyzing it and trying to like look for positive points about the Zhang Yan story here, and her specifically her optimism and naivety about the Trisolarian. So I thought the quote that she talks about where her and Luo Ji are on top of the mountain, and she says like, well, why can't they just come here and like just live in harmony? And Luo Ji is like, well, I'll just read the quote. So the quote's a little bit long, but I think it's interesting, and I think it's a good topic of discussion here.
Go ahead.
So Zhang Yan says, why do we have to drive them out into space to die? Give them a plot of land and let them coexist with us. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Luo Ji dealt silently with his emotions for the moment, and then pointed up to the sky and said, Yan Yan, I'm not the only one who heard you just now. Zhang Yan looked up nervously. Oh, right. There must be tons of Sophons around us. It might have been the Trisolar High Council himself who heard you. And you're all laughing at me, right? No, Yan Yan. Do you know what I'm thinking right now? He had a strong impulse to take her slender left hand, and which was lying next to the steering wheel, but controlled himself. And I'm thinking the only person who might actually have a chance of saving the world is you. Yeah, I found that part is pretty interesting, and like I think they could have expanded more on her actually having an ability to influence this plan. I don't know that she does. I think he just kind of finds it on his own. Kind of remembers it as he's thinking about Yo and Jay, and there's that scene where he falls in the lake and kind of comes to the realization. I don't know. Like I'm trying to analyze and trying to find any good parts of her story.
I was unable to find that kind of optimism about Zhang Yan's storyline. I was able to use it as a tool, and I thought that Da Shi bringing Zhang Yan for Luo Ji brings Da Shi, even closer to the wall facer. And at this point in the story, Shiqiang has saved his life and has like educated him, has been his comfort as his only countryman when they're flying, to the UN. And now he's brought his dream lover to life. And I think that throughout this whole book, we are seeing that those two stay old friends. The power and authority between them will switch more than once, but they become old friends who are meeting in different times in different places.
Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, again, it kind of like robs her of any agency too, and like she's already
Yeah, absolutely.
It now she's just like a prop for two guys to
A
get
prop,
to know each other.
exactly.
And like she doesn't. And I know, Amin, you haven't read this yet, and I think I mentioned on the main show, like her story doesn't get any worse, and it doesn't. Like this is as bad as it gets. Like all this like kind of cringy, like what I was just saying, like he like takes her hand or wants to take her hand and that kind of stuff, and it's like, ugh. But anyway, it doesn't get as bad at that as that, and as far as cringy language, but like there is a part where the UN basically, I think it's even maybe in the next episode, where the UN like takes her away, and they eventually get married and have a kid, and they take her away and say, all right, you're not going to be able to see her again unless you do something, because he's just sitting around doing nothing for 8 years or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Living his life of luxury and doing whatever. And so like he actually then starts to try to develop a plan after that, but she has nothing to do with it, right? And never does. So
no.
Yeah. I'm trying to look for ways that like she might have influenced him and like his thinking. Like I think like the part Tim also mentioned this during the show where they talk about the Mona Lisa in the Louvre and like how the smile can like convey a lot of different messages, without any talking, right? Just from the expressions, right? And I think they do a little bit of that on the ship, but it's not Luo Ji, it's other people. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to like find any positive thing to talk about that section. I mean, I'm sure
it's
some
like
people have.
in the rewrite, if it's just like Luo Ji and Zhuang Yan visiting the Louvre and then going to other different, artistic museums or things that would bring us some information about her character, and then it like is publicized that they're learning to communicate with their eyes, and that's what propels all of human civilization to like get better at communicating with their eyes, then maybe that's a redemptive place, but it definitely doesn't exist as it's written so far.
Right. Yeah. Or maybe she comes up with a plan or does something besides just have to hibernate, and then she eventually leaves them.
Just take a long nap.
And Thalia, we talked about this on the Made podcast, but another one of the hosts, Tim and I both confessed to just kind of skimming over all of these parts because we didn't really find it that interesting. So, yeah,
I'm nodding. Yeah.
But I also did notice there's a lot in these chapters, especially there's a lot to talk about painting, and I'm trying to like keep notes and like keep mental notes, bookmarks of things that I do see, and painting becomes a big concept, especially in the third book. When we get into like these like really abstract fairy tales, and painting's a big part of that. And then, not to mention, at the very end of the book, the solar system gets folded into 2 dimensions, and he mentions a couple times that it looks like a painting. So there seems to be a lot of quotes around that. And I also noticed there's one quote when Luo Ji and Zhang Yan were on top of the mountain, where Luo Ji says, "Looking at her amid the snow, the white face has lost all dimension." So I'm also looking for mentions of dimensionality, which there seems to be a lot. And, I think that's a big recurring theme around the whole series too, of like things losing or gaining dimensions.
Yeah, I was appreciative of Dan for pointing this out to me, because then it reminded me where I had found another mention of dimensionality in the soft cover version of the book. It's on page 137. The quote is about Keiko Yamasuke, who's the wife of one of the non-Chinese wall facers. And it says, "At first glance, she saw her husband's shadow in the bamboo grove in the yard as usual. There was no moon tonight. The bamboo and his kimono-clad figure lost their dimensionality and looked like paper cuttings hung beneath the stars." Later, when we are in the fourth dimension, the fourth dimensional ring looks at human beings as they currently exist, which is 3-dimensional creatures, and says that you're just like your thin paper cuttings. They see us as very fragile, very, missing a dimension. So again, there's that interplay of things that lose and gain dimensions.
I think they also mentioned that during the Project Sophon chapter too, where like they're looking down on Trisolaris, and they say it like looks two dimensional from
Yeah,
their
I wouldn't be
perspective.
surprised.
Yeah, I
Project
remember,
Sophon is such a good part of book one.
right. Yeah, so yeah, I think all that the Sophon stuff like that is big concept of dimensionality. This one, there's not so much of it throughout this book, but then like obviously like the next book, the book 3 is like just all about like the ring stuff is in the third book, right? Yeah, it is. Yeah, so there's like all that stuff in the fourth dimension with the pocket, the fourth dimensional pockets, the ring, the obviously the two dimensional attack. So much stuff around it. So Tim and Amin both actually mentioned that they felt a little bit anticlimactic that that Luo Ji is kind of revealed as the main character just by the sheer amount of like words that he gets. Maybe Amin, you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so given that there's 4 wall facers, so I thought the first book did a good job of setting up here's the problem that the next book is going to try to solve. So now there's 4 wall facers, but given that we spent all our time with one character leading up to this, and Dan on the main podcast tried to assuage our fears, but really it feels like the other 3 wall facers don't matter that much because we know that Luoji's going to be the one that we're going to end up following, and he's going to come up with a solution. So that was I thought that part could have been a mystery a little bit longer. So the way Dan broke it up, the end of the first episode of this season was the reveal that he is the 4th wall facer, but that was kind of obvious.
Yeah.
Just like I know Dan wasn't trying to spoil it for us, but it was very clear that that's what was going to happen. So yeah, that whole again, given all of the other stuff going on in this book, I think some of the parts with Ray Diaz and others I've been reading less diligently than I have the parts where I think the plot is going to take us, which I may come to regret later, but we'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong that Luo Ji is the main character, and he does come up with the ultimate plan to. It's not even. He doesn't even beat them. He just kind of like keeps them at bay. there's a thing called deterrence that he comes up with as part of the dark. He understands the dark force principle eventually, meaning that all civilizations like don't really care who's in the dark forest. They just shoot to survive. And so he comes up with a plan to kind of deter Trisolaris from attacking, and then they kind of like get stuck in like mutually assured destruction for like hundreds of years or like 100 years or something.
Right, but I think Amin is sort of onto something. Have you seen that like famous pictures of like Martin Luther King? Martin Luther King Jr. is often like photographed looking like a hero, looking like he's alone. Just the tension between like the great man theory of history and like the more community strength in numbers style of historical telling. And there's definitely a way to read this book that none of Luo Ji's plans would work if it weren't for the foundations that he gets to rely on, like Shiqiang teaching him and Ray Diaz like honestly teaching him how powerful deterrence can be, that it can actually pause like the entire PDC, entire UN, and make them give up all of their resources. And I think that there is a way to see that Luo Ji's plan like can't survive alone.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe that's why. Maybe on the opposite side, another topic was talking. There was some discussion on Reddit this past couple of weeks around Changxin and like her role, and like it started with like all Reddit posts seem to start with like how Changxin is terrible and like she ruins everything. But I thought some of the responses were really interesting and kind of like really lay out like because there seems to be a certain kind of person who like just. And I don't know what that kind of person is, but like there's like different categories of people, how they break up, right? They hate Changxin. She's terrible. She ruined everything.
I have a theory for what kind of people.
Yeah. I don't want to generalize too much, but yeah, I think we're probably on the same page there. Yeah, like there's that general theory. And then there's like the other people who, you know, I think like I fall into, like she actually is like representative more of like humanities and like that, you know, humanity chose her. That's what that's what we should aspire to, right? And not just like, not in contrast with like Wade, who just wants to just destroy everything. Like he definitely would have pushed that button as soon as he got it. No matter what happened, probably he probably wouldn't even like waited for Tressler to attack, but he probably just would press it right away. But humanity chose Changxin, right?
Right. Well, that's why I first brought up, sorry if it wasn't clear, like the image of Martin Luther King, it's not like whether or not he's a hero. I mean, I obviously think he is. History decided he is, but you can change that camera view, swing it around, and see that he's like surrounded by thousands of people. And in a way, like he's only there because like humanity chose them. And like for whatever Changxin did, I mean, humanity did choose her. And in some ways, she is their representative.
Yeah, so that your comment that's what made me think is like maybe that's why Changqing gets such hate, because she's in more contrast to Luo Ji, who does get that kind of hero worship, right? So he turns into this awesome samurai guy at the end. Everyone's like, "Whoa, he's awesome!" He's like sitting there like cross-legged for hundreds of years, and so like I think they have this contrast like where Changqing doesn't use the deterrence. So maybe that's why there's that hate for her, and then maybe like they wanted someone like Wade to like kind of pick up that mantle and like be a continuation of Luo Ji's deterrence.
Maybe some of the nationalism in China right now for the last couple of decades, and this is supplemented by Cixin Liu's own writings. I read a collection of essays that had one of his, and it talked about mostly his fame after writing Three Body, and it talked about the like large propaganda machine that has been telling us for a long time that technological like progress and like increasing the GDP, some kind of progress like that will solve all problems. And if you look at it that way and you like believe that very tempting, idea, then Changxin gets in the way of progress. I mean, like every time she stops progress into humanity's like light speed ships, she stops progress into, continuing to have this information from the Sophons because she's not strong enough to deter it. But I think Cixin Liu is inviting us to really sort of pry at that premise and say, like, is that better? Like, the more you progress, the more you advance, does that solve problems?
So what did Cixin Liu think? Like, what was his ultimate? Did he have like a? I mean, is he just like kind of posing that question, or does he actually have like a point of view on that?
I think it was amusing to read his essay on, Remembrance of Earth's Past, because he and his editor had decided that the third book would not really sell very well and that it wouldn't convert any new readers, that either like you liked science fiction, which pegs you into a very small market, or you don't. And so apparently he had this agree with his publisher that he's just going to write the third book pretty much exactly as he wanted, and he fills it with different dimensions and artificial black holes and humanity leaping through time and space. And he wrote the first two books to like ground people in something recognizable in the Cultural Revolution, and then in a near distant future, in a future where people still remember the 21st century and there are still countries that we recognize. And he thought that would be more attractive. And then the third book is what sold the whole series. Like the third book was incredibly popular in China. It wasn't understanding what the Cultural Revolution was. Like that wasn't what sold it. So there was something about the third book and like its wide scope and pushing on that I think he was surprised by, but it seems obvious looking back now in retrospect. Hindsight, I'm Captain Hindsight on that one, but the third book is just so good.
Yeah. I always figured, I guess I never knew. I always figured like the first book, The Three Body Problem, was the one that really rocketed success there. I didn't know that the third book was so popular in China.
Yeah, definitely.
Another thing that Tim and Amin both mentioned was that the chapters in Dark Forest were kind of off-putting. I mean, maybe you can talk more about that too, because you had said it's like a big run-on sentence, I think.
Yeah. So I think Tim felt more strongly about this than I did, but it was interesting to me that even though this chapter had breaks and it had changes in points of view, and they used, I'm reading the ebook version, so they had big ellipses in the middle of the page to say this is a different section. I don't know why this wasn't multiple chapters, and maybe it has something to do with just the construction of the book itself, and maybe if I had a physical copy it would make more sense to me. But
no.
it did it did seem to it started slow, but books always start slow, and then it just seemed to kind of drone on because it was just kind of monotonous, and you were waiting. I don't know why I do this when I read, but I was waiting for a chapter end to kind of like say, hey,
Yeah.
here's a big shift in
I think
something.
it does itself a disservice because it doesn't let
Yeah,
its big moments punctuate. It's
Yeah.
like Cixin Liu is like writing on a budget where he only gets like 3 chapter headings and he's got to like scrounge and really just make the best of them. But again, that's why I think like a rigorous re-edit would just like you don't even need new words added to this book to make it so much better. You could just like divide it up and
Yeah, like even like the
punctuate
breaks
it.
that they have in the current part could be chapters, right? Like that'd be perfectly fine to have the. I'm not sure why I did that. And the
Yeah.
interesting thing is like in Death's End, it's like there's millions of chapters in that thing. They're like
Yeah.
there's like there's like some chapters are like 2 pages. It's
Yeah,
like,
I counted. There's like 70 odd chapters or so.
yeah.
And there's like, we go from like 3 to like 70.
Yeah, I don't know why I mean, it makes sense in the context of Death's End, like why he has the chapters that way, because he has like those the the excerpts from
A past outside of time.
the
Well,
book,
you
right?
didn't consider, Dan. Maybe that's why Death's End is so long because it has like a half page of blank space,
That's
at
true.
the end of some chapters. So
Yeah,
you gotta think of that. You gotta think of the publishing costs.
that's
and,
true.
and Thalia raises a good point. So one of the sections in our podcast we had last season that I don't think we're doing this season is how would they make this a TV show or movie or whatever. And Thalia raises a good point that they could just basically transpose this to the screen as is, and I think in a semi-competent set of hands it would work fine. But again, when you're reading it, it's just everything kind of mushes into each other, and you don't get a second to appreciate all the beats. So I think that's when we talk about how would this be a movie, I think this is one part where they don't have to change a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can definitely see it like kind of cutting back and forth between the different wall facers and their plans and that stuff. And maybe like I don't know if they're gonna try to make it less obvious that Lochi is the main character. Like, but I
I
don't know.
think you have to just allow some of it. I mean, it's written in China by a Chinese author. It's the only Chinese wall facer. Like, you can sort of. I think I give him a little bit of a break.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, Thalia, I guess I've never. You and Dan may have talked about this, but I never asked you this. But are you looking forward to the Netflix series, or are you dreading it, or you're keeping an open mind? What is your attitude towards that?
Should I say on? I mean, didn't
You,
someone
you don't have to if you don't want to.
didn't some high official get poisoned for working on it?
He did. Yeah.
That's right.
He died.
Yeah, so that's a precarious. No, I mean, I absolutely, like you said, I mean, in the right pair of hands.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the Benny Weiss is the right pair of hands, but maybe we'll see.
Maybe we'll be invited to consult and we can give all this feedback, once again. In the right pair of hands, it would be great. But I mean, I think I'll probably, to finish up on what Dan was saying about these different Reddit posts and how other readers were able to take this series, I think I will update my current reading guide to include maybe more of book 2, because I think that if you go in and like artificially divide it for yourself or go in with an understanding that it's not actually like 3 gargantuan parts, that will it will elevate the experience.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, maybe have like artificial chapter markers. Like this is Thalia chapter 1, chapter 2.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because I mean, I think 3 Body Problem, like it seemed like the perfect amount of chapters, right? Like you could tell, like sort of like TV episodes, right? They had like punctuations at the end of those chapters, right? And here it's just like just keeps kind of going. Actually, that reminds me of a question I wanted to ask you, Tali. I don't think I got a chance to yet. So, of the 3 Body Problem and Dark Forest, which one do you prefer, or do you prefer either of them?
Of the first book to the second book,
Yeah,
I really did appreciate the end of the second book and the way that we've been hinted at the meaning of the Dark Forest, and then the simple way that Luoji ends up explaining it to Shiqiang, and it sort of unfolds and takes over both of them. I think that was like one of the highlights of the whole series. So I really quite enjoyed the second book because I really liked Project Sophon from the first book, but it lacks any characters that I care about and like a have alluded to, I would definitely, cut like the first 70 pages.
Yeah,
How about you?
I go back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've reread the series like 3 or 4 times now, and like every read is like I kind of changed. I think right now, like if you were to ask me, I think Dark Forest is probably my second favorite. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so the Three Body would be the third favorite. Not because I like it. I don't like it because I do like it. But yeah, like you said, like the end, especially the end part. As soon as in part 3, when they jump to 200 years in the future, and like you see like the world, you see how the world's progressed in 200 years, and then like all the events that happen because of the droplet attack stuff, the
Mm.
revealing of the Dark Forest attack, like all that stuff, and like the mysteries of I remember like the first time I read it, like I heard about the Great Ravine. It's like such an interesting concept to me, that like this whole period of history, like another dark age that happened in between like him hibernating.
And also, I mean, Zhang Beihai, you mentioned like
Yeah.
the Reddit post on Chongqing. I also was looking at different Reddit posts about how Chinese readers and American readers, have different views. Unsurprisingly, Chinese readers seem to kind of hate Chongqing, and more Americans are okay with her. But one marked difference that this poster points out is that every Chinese reader has an opinion on Zhang Beihai.
A good opinion
Well,
or
an opinion for
oh, okay.
one. And like if you just read book 2, like Amin is saying, it's hard to sort of not have the desire to skip when you're like, oh, we're reading about the warship Tong again.
Right.
Why? Nothing is happening at all. But yes, if you read a little bit further into Dark Forest, there's massive payoff with Zhang Beihai, and he is like this lonely hero and the father of humanity and drop dead sexy.
Yeah, actually, I think Tim had mentioned. I was re-listening to the main show earlier, and he'd mentioned like he kind of foresaw Zhang Beihai being kind of like the leader of humanity and like taking over the reins, and that's not true at all. Like, not what happens, but
Mm.
he does save humanity by kind of embracing the escapism and realizing like the only way for us to win to survive is to get out, right? But like there's also the part in the next chapter in part 2 with the meteorite attack, which
Can
is
you
really
remind
cool.
me?
The part where he uses the meteorite bullets to kill the scientists. To
Right.
Yeah, that happens in
It's
part 2. It's
creative and bold and like I mean it's as good as any, Bond mission.
yeah.
It's yeah,
So yeah,
especially in the right hands. I would love to see that on the screen.
definitely. I think I mean, I remember that from the first time I read it. That's like being like one of the highlights of the book. It's like, whoa, that's
It was
so.
so badass.
Yeah. So I mean that happens in the next chapter. So hopefully after that you guys will get a better appreciation of Zhang Beihai, just like his creativeness around how to implement his solution. But it's still like there's still like a twist there. So like it still looks like he's doing this stuff so humanity can prevail and eventually triumph against the Trisolarans. But the whole plan is that he just wants to get us to a point where we have good enough ships to get out of the solar system to
Yeah. But it's quite nuanced. Like I do think it is as good as I said Bond or like a Mission Impossible plot, because Zhang Beihai first goes to Ding Yi, the physicist, who, also becomes a little bit more important later,
yeah.
and asks him like, can you suppress the news of fusion working? And his first is like the least amount of interference. He doesn't want like to be the hero. He doesn't want to step in. He just doesn't want humanity to go in the chemical rocketry direction. So he asks him, can you suppress it? The physicist tells him like, no way, there's way too much media buzz. And he just accepts that as the truth and then has to like rethink. And then he has to come up with this new plan. It's not like he went in with like any kind of bloodlust.
Yeah, so hopefully, I mean, that means you're gonna read the Zhang Beihai stuff a little bit more carefully. I know, like it's there's a lot of military talk and a lot of like it seems kind of like by the numbers in the beginning, and it is, because like just military people being military people, but it has like really really cool payoffs at the end.
I had one comment that just was from the last spoiler cast that Amin reminded me of. So, like Amin was saying, Amin, please correct me if I'm like butchering your impression, but you were saying that the Trisolarans' transparent thoughts and like the implications of an alien life without the concept of lying is more interesting than the concept of like super tech aliens, right?
Yeah, I think that's more interesting, yes.
Similarly, I think it's hard not to really admire the work that Leo puts into fleshing out the world of humanity's future. And we talked about in the summary, we talk about Hubble seeing the Trisolaren fleet, Hubble 2, rather.
Yeah.
And I think that the Ringier Fitzroy telescope, which is 7 polished lenses floating in space without a barrel, humanity's first barrelless telescope, is almost like much more interesting than the concept of like a ship that has life support. Even though a life support ship is probably harder technology, it's something that we've been imagining and dreaming of for, like hundreds of years. We've had that in our imagination. And I don't know if you've ever dived down a YouTube rabbit hole like I have, where they construct lenses and grind them, but it's incredibly arduous. And like the makers turn it upside down when they like leave the room to get a glass of water so that no specks of dust land on top of the lens. And the fact that humanity made 7 of them and took advantage of space not having gravity to be able to like line them up without a barrel and build this super powerful telescope shows that we haven't left our humanity behind. We're still so curious, and we're still trying to smash atoms together and build a circumsolar like collider and build this big telescope, and humanity's still looking, rather than just the concept of we can build a bunker world, we can have a ship that has life support, we can have super powerful rail guns,
Yeah. Or yeah, where they built that black hole in that sphere and they observed it just to observe it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just like real curiosity and something that follows, something that seems more human than just like, honestly, any alien civilization would have an interest in like preserving its own resources and being able to survive, to be able to dehydrate and rehydrate on a ship.
Right. Maybe that's why, like, to me, like Wade was never super interesting, because he just seemed like a relic of the past, right? He just wants a bigger gun. He just wants to blow stuff up. Like, it's not for any betterment of humanity. It's just for his, bloodlust, or his.
Are you saying he's 2-dimensional? But
but yeah, like maybe that. I mean, I don't know, but reading other people's like comments, especially on that Reddit post, like people are like really like saying like Wade would have been the savior of humanity. Wade would have done it. Changxin's terrible. Like that. So it's such a that's never even occurred to me when I was reading it. And actually, like during the main show, also like I'd asked Tim and Amin like what the plans of the 3 Wallfacer plans that we know about so far, like which one has the best chance of succeeding, they thought, and both of them picked.
What's the answer?
Yeah, I'll let Amin stay.
Yeah, so Tim and I both thought that Heinz' plan was the most interesting and had the best chance of success. And after that, the other thing I was thinking was, it seems, again, I'm coming from probably a different lens than both of you, but my perspective was that of the 3 wall facers, the fact that the American is pro-war or aggressive, I guess. I was wondering if that was some type of cultural comment as well, and then the British are refined and more thoughtful in their approach. And to me, to me that the two approaches where they are just trying to make bigger and better bombs was much less interesting.
So like one is like just very macro, and one is like super super micro. Like both the American and the Venezuelan are blowing things up.
Yeah. Yeah, but then the Heinz's plan is just about betterment. He doesn't have a plan really. He just wants to continue on his wife research to like better humanity, and like that's their plan anyway. That's not, but I mean that's kind of, well, so the plan eventually, what happens is like they kind of implant, or they say they're going to implant messages inside people's brains saying
faith. To implant a faith,
that they that they can achieve victory. They basically they suggest that they be triumphalists, right? That's what he says he's going to do, but actually it's the opposite. He like flips the bit and like says, actually they're going to become escapists, and that's a secret plan. And it works, right? I guess because those people eventually just go on those ships and escape. So yeah, it's all the Wallfacer plans. Like you had mentioned before, I think both of you guys said that like their plans seem kind of obvious right now, but they all have like crazy twists to them. So it's
Mhm.
and actually in the next part, the part 2 that's coming up, we actually find out the extent of both Tyler and Diaz's plans, because we meet both.
Uh-oh, if
Yeah,
they're exposed, it probably means they have wall breakers.
yeah, yeah. So we meet both of the wall breakers, and
Yeah.
yeah, they lay their plans bare, and like they know all that crazy twist that they're coming up with. Since part 2, like this book gets a lot more interesting because we start meeting the wall breakers. You know, we kind of like understand these plans. Yeah, the John Bay High becomes a lot more interesting. I forget what Luo Ji does. Oh, the virus part happens in part 2 too, where he gets the
Ugh,
genetically
too
modified
soon.
virus. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that was another thing that um, going back to the whole idea of foreshadowing which plan is going to do something was the
Mm.
fact that uh, only one of the wall facers did not get a wall breaker, even though they said he's the most dangerous one.
Yeah.
Um, again, it was just kind of giving him a free pass, I thought, but
I was wondering that, like, if they gave him a wall breaker, like the words he says when he discovers or like comes to the realization of cosmic sociology of the Dark Forest is like, Luoji, I am your wall breaker. And I think it was that they didn't want to assign him anyone who would get him any closer to that realization.
Hmm.
Like Trosolaris is most in danger when humanity knows about the Dark Forest and like secondarily is able to implement it. So it's like when Luoji realizes it that he calls himself a wall breaker and then like actually starts to get to work on his plan. Yeah, I would agree. It's not really explained. Like this guy is the most dangerous, so let's ignore him.
yeah, but the way you just explained it, Talia, makes a lot more sense than when I was just reading it. And it was like,
Yeah, I'm
hey, this
glad.
person's the most dangerous. Let's let him run amok, and we'll deal with that later. But the way you described it makes a lot more sense. So.
Well,
Mm-mm.
to be fair, they do try to kill him a bunch of times. Like they shoot him, they try to hit him with the car crash. Like they give him, then I guess in the next chapter they genetically engineer a virus specifically targeted towards him. So, and then in the future, he almost gets killed a bunch of times. So
Oh, see, I took those attempts. So the attempt on his life outside of the UN, I took that as a sign that as a way to force him to take his security more seriously. It wasn't that
oh, interesting.
because
Mm.
he was more about I don't need any guards and this is ridiculous and I'm quitting, and to me that was a way to pull him back into. Um, to have him stop protesting so much and just have him fall in line, and then he figures out a way to
It
exploit the
could be.
situation.
Yeah, it could be. I think you brought up a good point about like the two wall facers plans that are about like, I don't know, aggressive force. We do see when Luoji does finally take his security more seriously, he like asks to be put in a bunker and they put him underground and like all the conventional means of security are followed. The wall breakers, like the ETO, they do meet up and think like, can we tunnel in? Can we like bomb him? Like all these really obvious power things, and then the only thing that even gets close to him is on the small scale. It's like a virus. It's like a software problem. It's nothing like we just haven't found a big enough bomb.
Hmm.
So in hearing you talk about, is this played for laughs? Is this like a comedic thing, or is this supposed to be really intense? Because to me, it all seems a little hilarious that they would do these types of things.
Like a little bit like, like Bugs Bunny or like
Yeah.
Tom and Jerry.
I was just gonna say Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's what you don't want, if you're the ETO.
Yeah. I don't know if this played for laughs. To me, like Liu just had in his mind like about the genetically engineered virus, and like that was like a cool way to get to him. And like we can't get to him through these conventional means, right? So like let's engineer a virus that like basically what happens is like everyone around him just gets like a cold, but then like Luoji gets like super sick because like the virus is like targeted towards him, and the only way to get to him is by all the people around him getting this cold, and he eventually gets that cold or gets the virus. Maybe a little too close to home, given both the pandemic and the guy in China getting poisoned around
But
through
I
body.
don't know. Maybe, I mean, there's not really, as you can tell, there's not a ton of humor. There's not a lot of scope for
Yeah.
levity in these books. Maybe, like, if it were reimagined, it could be, because, I mean, Trisolaris does think that carrying out an assassination and concealing who carried it out, like that to them is a really complicated plan.
I think like yeah,
so there's like scope for humor there, like the difference.
I think the books in general, yeah, don't have too much humor. Although I would say like these chapters, like this section where Luoji like he starts like abusing his wall facer powers, to he asked for like that $300,000 crate of wine at the bottom of the sea and says that's
It's like
part
intentionally kind of campy.
right, like that. This is like the funniest part of the whole series. But there is a part like later on, like after Luoji wakes up in the future after hibernation, and like he like narrowly avoids death like 4 times in a row. It's like he almost falls in a hole.
By like the 4th time, that's true. I think like the more
what's the 4th time?
Oh, they get so much more ridiculous. Is a car crash the first one?
I forget, but he like almost falls down a hole, like a sign fall, like something falls out of the sky, and like
something falls from this, like literally like an anvil from the sky, like it's literally that silly. And then they like decide to rally at Shiqiang's new pad. They go to his leaf, and then like the sofa attacks him, and then they're like, "Whoa, that was crazy! Time to go to sleep. Let's order some sleeping meds." And then they order sleeping meds, and like, whoop, it's actually poison. And if you like, it just seems very silly at the end. They finally, they just, again, they kind of resolve that anticlimactically. Like people show up and install a firewall. Like IT just saves the day.
Just like in real life.
Yeah.
Yay. Is there anything you're like looking forward to specifically in the next chapter or next part?
Well, now I'm looking for all the Bond-like action, so I'm looking forward to that. And
I'll get it.
Awesome.
And then it's like Bond in space too.
And do we get any more of the Trisolarans' perspective in this book, or is that not happening anymore? Because at the end of the first book, they kind of shifted the point of view to them. Do they do that in this book at all?
No, not the same way. We do eventually meet they basically like have like this robot that they put a Trisolaran, like a Sophon into its brain, and kind of power the
but
robot.
Still in the framework of like human affairs.
Got it.
So,
okay.
But you don't really see from that. That's the and
you'll have to read to the end of the series to get what you're looking for.
Yeah. But it's not like the same way where you like totally switch perspectives. But there is like a really, really good chapter in Death's End where we get the perspective of a different alien called Singer, who is the one that eventually destroys the solar system. And it's the same kind of like shift in like abrupt shift in perspective from their perspective.
I would agree. I mean, like we hear Zhuang Yan and Luoji, and he's like, careful, that could have been the Trisolar High Council. And like it just is a tease. You're like, wait, show me the Trisolar High Council. Like that was so interesting. I want to see it again. But no, unfortunately not.
We do hear from them, but via Sophon, the Sophon robot.
Yeah, but it's different like when they're telling each other, if you mess up, you will burn. Okay, that makes sense. Because like that's just how they communicate, this super totalitarian, transparent thought society. And I guess we can't see it because the whole reveal at the end of book 2 is Trisolaran civilization has changed as a result of their contact with Earth. So maybe we can't see them because the whole point is that they're changing. But yeah, it would have been nice.
I know they say they changed, but did they? Do you think they actually did? I don't know. I think that was all starting the ruse.
When I say change, I mean like, are you sure you don't mind being spoiled? I mean,
I'm positive, yes.
Okay, I mean change as in like they go from 1% of light speed to like light speed. That's a huge change.
I see. Yeah.
They're advancing, their society like is less like they learn to lie. So not necessarily changes for the good, but
yeah. Because I was thinking you're talking about like how they try to be like, they seem like they're more friendly with us, in the beginning of Death's End.
Oh yeah, no.
And they're like actually no. Or they have like the droplets like protect the other ships, But
the fox protecting the henhouse.
So one thing I didn't spoil Amina. So in the first season, I didn't spoil him on Operation Gujung, the Zither attack. I wanted him to read that, and so I also didn't spoil him on the droplet attack for this one. So I'll leave that to be unspoiled for Amin to read, because it's probably the best part of the whole series. Maybe not, but it's one of the best parts of the whole series.
All right, well, thanks for listening. Leave comments by emailing us at rehydrate@fastmail.com or on Twitter at rehydratepod. Please join us for next episode for The Spell, where we will be discussing part 2 of The Dark Forest by Lucy Shin.